Now it's the time for the learning journey course with two important and hosts of our belonging to our network. And I would like to invite to the floor the moderator, Professor Aurora Savelli, who is the member of the steering committee and is professor of Orientale in Naples, to introduce the two keynote lecture, Professor Giacomo Lorandi from the Catholic University in Milan, and later Sabina Hajeva Khalid from the Azerbaijan University of Architecture and Construction. By the way, and this is my last final note for today, I would like to welcome Mr. Aliyev, Nemat Aliyev, the first secretary of the Azerbaijan embassy in Rome, who is attending this session. So thank you very much, dear friends, for now. And now I invite Aurora, the floor is yours for the continuation with the Learning Journey lecture session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Simone. It's a pleasure for me to introduce you this part of work and to present you Giacomo Lorandi. Giacomo Lorandi collaborates with the Catholic University of Milan, in the Department of Early Modern and Contemporary History. He is also a former fellow in Early Modern History at the University of Fribourg. His area of research is the European Enlightenment, in particular innovation in care during the long 18th century, and in particular, doctor role and the social recognition of the doctor role. He is author of several papers published in historical journals, including Les dynamiques d'une célébrité transnationale, l'inoculation de l'enfant Ferdinand de Parme, the dynamics of a transnational celebrity, the inoculation of the Infante Ferdinand of Parma, 1764. The title is the title of this keynote is the pandemic of COVID-19 as a way to reconsider the socio-economical model of development, lessons from the past, new approaches for the future. Giacomo, the floor is yours. 25 minutes.
Okay, first of all, thank you very much to you, Aurora, and to the organization, to the president, to let me propose my idea about a way to reconsider the past and to find some new idea, new possibility for the future. So just a second, I try to show my slide. So I hope you can watch my.
Yes, Giacomo, we can see.
Okay, so the title is The Pandemic of COVID-19 as a Way to Reconsider the Socio-Economical Model of Development, Lesson from the Past, New Approaches for the Future. So I would like to start my speech with a famous Latin motto, Historia Magistra Vitae. And at the same time, I would like to propose a question that I hope you can, a question that I hope we can reflect on it at the end of my speech. So Historia Magistra Vitae, is that true? Is it really true that Historia can help us to reconsider our life in the contemporary? So historical facts teach new generation how to avoid remaking the mistakes of yesterday. In the time I have at my disposal, I will take it to the past events in order to shed some light on the best practices it may be worth adopting in order to avoid repeating mistakes and, as a consequence, avoid the possibility, not entirely unlikely, that certain catastrophes will happen again. From the plague of Athens, as described by Thucydides in his History of the Peloponnesian War, to the Spanish flu, human life is under the constant threat of pestilence, epidemic disease of cyclical pattern. It's not by chance that since the Middle Ages, in the Apocalypse of John, it was represented by 4 knights, 3 of them impersonating famine, war, and pestilence. The biblical metaphor makes it clear that throughout the history of humanity, these 3 terrible elements have been closely connected. Think of the pestilence that broke out in Rome in 1527, following the devastation wrought by the Landsknecht. Crossing the Italian peninsula, those imperial soldiers at once brought war, caused famine by stealing all that they could, and spread the pestilence that, originating the battlefield of Central Europe, eventually reached the former capital of the Roman Empire. Also, with their raids in the countryside, the Landsknecht contributed to it, the population, as it was easier there to fall sick because the precarious living and hygiene condition. The shortage of land workers made the ongoing famine even more severe. So during the pestilence of Rome in 1527, more than 30,000 of people died by this plague, and also for all the problem connected with this pestilence. Famine, war, and pestilence, I say. These 3 interconnected cataclysms resurface in various historical episodes, not only with the appearance of the bacteria Yersinia pestis. Also, we can think about the pestilence of 14th century, one that caused the death of more than half of the population of the Europe. So a great plague. So Yersinia pestis or other six that are typical of early modern era, like typhus fever, of smallpox disease, or cholera. All of them latent in society and just awaiting the right condition in order to reemerge. Under the constant threat of epidemics, society began to develop a more complex and effective response to such kinds of plague than those classical remedies, such as laxative, bloodletting, and leeches. However, it was only in the 18th century, with the gradual diffusion of the Enlightenment movement, that a more scientific approach began to circulate with the effect of removing the veil of superstition towards medicine and more broadly toward curative practices. This new approach stressed the importance of the connection between personal well-being and the cleanliness of the surrounding environment. It emphasized the importance of hygiene, personal and the household, and the cleanliness of the air and of the living spaces as a first step toward recovery from illness. This perspective also involved city and housing planning. For example, favoring the construction of dwellings where the living area was separated from the animal quarters. Such awareness was quick to develop in town, slower in the countryside. So the 18th century brought greater awareness to the role played by the scientific community and by society at large in defeating the great epidemics that affected humanity. So we can remind that during the 18th century, the Yersinia pestis, so the pestilence, disappeared. We don't know why, we don't know how, but pestilence, pestis leave his place to other great pandemic like smallpox. So just think of a scientific and cultural debate that quickly propagated all over the European continent in the second half of the 18th century around the smallpox disease, which resulted in the development of the vaccine by Jenner in the following century. From the history of epidemics and the human response to them, we can draw some lessons, or better, topoi, recurrent themes at which it's worth to take a deeper look. As yesterday, so today, a pandemic cannot be faced individually. In order to overcome it, we must go through a social pact that involves the mutual collaboration of institutions, communities through the practice of active citizenship, the industrial sector, and the market. Such synergy is the fuel that allows a society to overcome an epidemic. Indeed, when a pandemic breaks out, one should not let oneself be misled by the instinctive inclination to consider the medical aspect solely. Of course, this is the most visible and urgent feature, but attending to it alone would reduce the speed of recovery. As we can saw in the recent months, from being responsible for a global health crisis, the COVID-19 disease went on to spark an economic crisis. From the job market, it went up along the production chain. Like the Spanish flu, at the beginning of the last century, today's pandemic is hitting various dimensions. Think of its consequence for our cities. Many people have left for smaller urban centers with the spread of smart working measures in order to facilitate social distancing, contributing further to the depopulation. As a consequence, many shops and restaurants have closed down. Such changes, in turn, have severely affected the housing market. Looking at events that have shaken the foundation of our society, it will be comforting to have an erase and rewind button that could propel us back to the year 2019, to our typical pre-pandemic daily schedule and lifestyle. However, reassuring a thought that might be, it's not the way to face the problem. Recall that in 1815, a similar approach was taken by those allies who, after the collapse of the Napoleonic Empire, following the principle of the legitimacy and power balance, opted for a return to the past. The choice gave rise to a period of revolution all over Europe, which eventually ended with the birth of the national state. It's clear, therefore, that whatever the positive or negative outcomes of the pandemic, it cannot be simple cancelled. And from there, we should take off again. COVID-19 has allowed us to stop and reflect upon what we are doing, to think about our economic development model and its consequences for the environment. As we cannot go back, we must look forward and imagine alternative economic development policies, centered less on the economic growth and more on the social well-being as our ultimate end. Thus, I am suggesting the adoption of a transformative resilience approach. That is to say, being able to face shocks and persistent structural changes by adopting strategies that allow to preserve our well-being. For this to become true, first and foremost, we must avoid being tempted by the illusion of positive determinism. Tragedies don't automatically ensure the moral regeneration of civilization. We need to broaden our perspective and take into consideration the various domains that influence our life. During the pandemic, the market showed that it cannot return to normality by itself. Just think of the sanitization products, which were in high demand, still extremely scarce. The development focused on quantitative growth only inevitably ends up by depleting natural resources and public goods, water, air quality, climate. The pursuit of economic growth is a factor that contributes to social fragility and endangers our own health. The pursuit of economic growth is a factor that contributes to the social fragility and endangers our own health. A first step to solve such problems requires the necessary collaboration of the entire community through active citizenship. It involved the necessary collaboration. The pandemic has shown that health not only is a private good, but it's directly related to death of your neighbors. More broadly, the pandemic has caused us to reflect upon the effectiveness of the Western social model, especially if one wishes to adapt it to the emerging economies. Certainly, the guarantee of freedom, equality, and welfare of the so-called First World is to be diffused. And this notwithstanding the fact that the pandemic has shed some light on how such systems compare with those of the people in need. Some inequalities have emerged not only between the rich and the poor, but also between the young and the older generation, thus broadening the range of disparities in communities at any latitude. In order to reach this goal, we must rethink our development model and lean toward a welfare society where the state assumes the task of assuring individual well-being. According to this view, the subsidiary principle takes on a role of primary importance. However, in my opinion, we would need a more development approach than the simple horizontal one. Indeed, the pandemic demonstrated that the latter is not effective enough, especially in the health sector. In order to build resilient societies that diminish the content of scarce resources, it is of primary importance to think in terms of quality of life and multidimensional well-being, individual and collective, and to review the educational system with such principles in mind. The public sector should aim at educating a new generation of responsible children, attentive to the common good. As a result, it should renew its techniques, methods, and spaces. As the foundation of the creation of value rests on the quality of time, on natural resources and social relationships, on culture and the possibility of regeneration, education should raise awareness of socially and environmentally sustainable values. Only in this way can develop be decoupled from the destruction of natural resources. On the contrary, such an approach would facilitate the creation of a circular economy based on the use of renewable energy sources and respect to the natural resources. As for domestic and international policies, institutions should be understood as the facilitators of the civic society's energy. New incentives and regulations should be devised in order to stimulate and prize civic behavior directed towards the common good. The whole Western model is called into question. It should step back in its role of imposing top-down forms of behavior upon citizens and seek rather to stimulate their attention and responsibility so that they spontaneously choose to care for the common good. This will be the challenge in the years to come between the authoritarian regimes on the one hand, which, according to few, provide more reliable guarantors of the right choice to take, and democracies on the other, which, on the contrary, rely on the interaction between forward-looking institutions and the shared awareness of their citizens. In conclusion, it seems clear that today, like yesterday, Pandemics are an opportunity for a fresh start, a regenerative moment in which, in order to overcome the difficulties, the best practices must be adopted and put at the disposal of the community. It happened with the smallpox in the 18th century, with polio in the aftermath of the war, the Second World War, and it's happening now with the COVID-19. Generative continues to be the deepest roof of our action. We shouldn't forget to ensure that the building of generativity and transformativity, resilience should pay attention to the last. The people in need. In period of crisis, our societies are like chains, as strong as their weakest link. So, I hope you are, my idea arrived to you. I hope you are interested in my idea. I hope so. And thank you very much for your attention. And I think that my time is over. 11:25. So I leave
Thank you,
space
Giacomo.
to my colleagues. So thank you very much to everybody.